Is the Constitution dead? Let's find out what Doug Wilson has to say.
Exploring theology, doctrine, and all of the fascinating subjects in between, broadcasting from an undisclosed location, Dead Men Walking starts
now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Dead Men Walking Podcast. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing with a friend. As always, you can find out more at dmwpodcast.com. Follow us anywhere on social media at Dead Men Walking Podcast. First up, Apologetics Live, guys. Andrew Rappaport, Apologetics Live, every Thursday from 8 to 10 p.m. It's a live stream. It is talking about apologetics, theology, doctrine. Andrew Rappaport jumps on there, invites people on the live stream. They ask the questions. He answers them. It's pretty fun. And some people get on there and try to stump them. Last week they had an atheist on there. I think her moniker online is the Atheist Grandma. They had a really good discussion. Very interesting. You can check it out at apologeticslive.com. Find the links to watch the live stream every Thursday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard. Go check it out. Apologetics Live, of course, is part of the Christian podcast community. Love what Andrew's doing over there. Go check it out, guys. So, just want to do a little intro here to our my conversation with Doug Wilson. And we were talking about is the Constitution dead? It was a really good conversation. We talked about how do we view the Constitution as Christians? How do we try to blow it all up and start over? Do we try to repair it? We talked about history a little bit. Political history. Was there a time in America where the morality of the people reflected the intent of the Constitution the most? It was good. But before we get into that, I had just two things really quick that interested me this week I want to talk about. I think by the time you're listening to this, it'll have been maybe a day or two since Kennedy dropped out of the race and endorsed Trump. Which keep an eye on this because that's actually pretty big for the race because RFK was a spoiler in 6 or 7 states. Just some quick numbers for you for those interested. In Arizona, Trump was down to Harris 44 to 45%. RFK was almost 6% at 5.8. In Nevada, 44 Trump, 43 Harris. He's a 5% spoiler in that state. 5% spoiler in Wisconsin. Trump was down by a few points, 44 to 46. In Michigan, Trump was down 43 to 45. He's a 6% spoiler in that state, RFK. And then Pennsylvania, 44 to 46, 4.5% spoiler. 4.5% North Carolina, where Trump and Harris are in a dead heat at 45. And then Georgia, Trump was up by 3 points, 46-44. And RFK is a 4% spoiler. So some really important states there where RFK probably could have made the difference one way or another for either candidate has now suspended his campaign and endorsed Trump. And he said he's going to be bringing over some other independents and Democrats with him too. So just kind of watch that in the next few weeks. It will be very interesting to see how that endorsement plays out. And RFK, did a speech yesterday, I believe it was, just talking about how he never left the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has left him, how they are pro-fascism, pro-communism, pro-death. They're for censored speech. They're for the industrial war complex, which is pretty crazy because in my lifetime, we've seen even the war stuff flip to where Republicans were usually your neocons, and Democrats were more hawkish on international wars, and now since Obama, we've seen it go totally the other way. But yeah, RFK endorsing Trump is big news. Also, too, I saw this meme, and it had some truth to it. Excuse me. It looks like it's an AI-generated meme with two guys talking in 6 different panels, but it just has questions and answers, and I want you guys to think about these because I love a good philosophical meme, right? And you hear these questions or these statements from atheists, and here's some questions that you can give them back. There's a guy who says, there is no truth, right? We've heard that. There is no truth. And the other guy says, is that true? So how are you determining that there is no truth? The second one is truth is unknowable. And the other guy says, well, how do you know that? Right? How do you know? You're making a statement that truth is unknowable. How do you know that? The third panel says there are no absolutes. We hear this a lot from the left. Subjective morality, there are no absolutes. And the guy answers him and goes, absolutely? Are there absolutely no absolutes? You're making an absolute statement about absolutes. Only your five senses provide real knowledge, says the one man. And the other man says, say which of the five? Making a point that your conscience, you actually thinking it is outside of the five senses. So say which one of the five, because by you saying that, you're saying there's more than the five senses that are helping you provide real knowledge. The fifth panel is logical arguments are not evidence. And the guy says, what's your evidence for that? And then the last panel, only the physical realm is real. And the guy says that claim itself is not physical, so it's self-refuting. I just found this entertaining and also enlightening because I love memes that just pack a lot of knowledge into just very simple points. And what this meme was doing is it's showing you that there are statements, and mostly we hear these statements, the first statements that I was saying, from the left, from the secular, from the progressive, and very simple questions you can ask to that. When someone says there is no truth, and you say, how do you know that's true? Is that true? Truth is unknowable. How do you know? Right? So the left is very good at trying to attack the absolutes of the believer when in fact they're making absolute statements that have no logical basis and are fallacies in and of themselves. So I'll post that to X and to social media. You can take a look at it, but kind of just a really quick 6-point guide on how you can refute some of the things that you hear within secular realms that just don't make any logical sense. But those are the only two things I got for you guys this week. We're going to get into it with Doug Wilson. Like I said, is the Constitution dead? How do Christians respond to it? Are we blowing it up, starting over? Are we amending it? Are we adhering to it as is? And what does the Christian do in response to the country that we're living in now? But it was as always, Pastor Doug Wilson, very gracious with his time. I think the episode only went maybe 30, 35 minutes. But, and at the end, we did ask him about his Tucker Carlson appearance. And he gave us some kind of inside information on that. So you can watch to the end. That was the last question that was kind of off subject, but I just had to ask. One of Tucker's more popular episodes was with Pastor Doug Wilson. If you haven't seen that, go check that out. I find that very interesting. But all right, here we go. More with Doug Wilson next. So good to have you here, Doug. Thanks for coming back on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Happy to do it.
Yeah, so there's a lot been going on. It seems like every 2 weeks on Twitter we have something new to argue about, and I don't I don't particularly pay a lot of attention to most of it because I have a real life and a real job, and we homeschool and real estate, and don't want to spend that much time online arguing with people I don't know. But I did see a month or so ago, something came up and it was trending and it said, is the Constitution dead? And when I looked into that, I went, well, this is something I've been saying for a while. It feels like it's functionally dead. I feel like the federal government has become so large and we have so many regulations and so many different things that functionally it seems like we don't adhere to a lot of it. And it got me thinking of how do we view the Constitution as believers, especially as I probably hold very closely to the same thing you do as a Presbyterian. I'm a general equity theonomist and believe that there is probably a place for the Constitution, but might need to be reworked in some aspects. But people saying the Constitution is dead, there's a minority of them saying, hey, we blow it all up and we kind of start over. And I was wondering your thoughts on that as I have you here for a few minutes. First and foremost, how do we view the Constitution as a believer? When we're looking at New Covenant, Old Covenant, we're believers, and then we see the Constitution. What are your thoughts there?
First, I think that the Constitution is not only a lawful form of government if followed, but I think the Constitution as written is a work of theological genius. And I think that we could do nothing. there are very few things that we could do that would be better than returning to the Constitution. I think that there may be some sandpapered spots that I would want to see here and there, but I'd like to do that in accordance with the way that was adopted for amending the Constitution. So I'd like to see it. I'd like to see everything done decently and in order. When I look at the discussions with the people who want to blow it all up or bulldoze it and start over, I have no confidence that what they came up with after they started over would be anywhere close to as good as the Constitution.
So yeah, I'm on the same page there with you, but I feel like there's a pendulum swing going on. And I think it happens in politics. I think it happens within the Christian community, within theology, to where the pendulum goes too far one way, we seem to overcorrect, it feels like. And and you've spoken a lot about
it's like growing up in a church that's full of hypocrisy and then walking away disillusioned and starting your own religion. Well, your own religion is probably going to be a whole lot worse than the church full of hypocrites. The better way would be to work for reformation within the institution that at one time was healthy and orthodox.
Yeah, I kind of saw it in my own life too, going to a very fundamentalist, legalistic church when I was younger, and then we swing that pendulum all the way to the full charismatic Pentecostal gold coming from the ceilings. It's kind of like you abandon one, you overcorrect. Right. So I see it, spiritually. We also see it politically. What are the rough spots you mentioned that you would, just out of curiosity, the rough spots in the Constitution where you'd like to kind of sand those and smooth those over?
Yeah, so the men who drafted the Constitution were doing so in a society that was overwhelmingly Christian. And so when they were talking about, for example, religious tests for office, they were talking about the differences between Presbyterians and Baptists.
Right.
The colonies were overwhelmingly Christian, and they were assuming that was the way it was going to continue to be, which has not been the case. And so not all religions are worldview neutral when it comes to things like free institutions. And so consequently, there has to be we have to have some firewalls that acknowledge the lordship of Christ.
Yeah. It's very strange because I've even heard within Christian communities we've got this mantra of separating ourselves or distancing the Christianity that was really intertwined with many of the founding fathers, with the Constitution. And we see it even in major evangelical circles where they go, well, no, there was deists, which was true. There were some differing ideologies and theologies there. But boy, you read books like God and Government, I think DeMar, and some other folks that really dig into the history, and you've even spoken on it. I know some guys from your church will even post the Presbyterian Revolt, right? Talking about the Revolutionary War. And you even speaking about after some major constitutional issues take place, we have national days of prayer, and you had the Supreme Court saying we need to, basically return to God and things like that. It blows my mind that we can just erase that history. And it seems like we kind of want to. The secularists definitely want to. But what is this trend towards even the majority of non-denominational evangelical Christians going, no, we have to erroneously state this separation of church and state, which we know that's taken out of context when we talk about that. It was a letter written, and not talking about what they're saying. Why do you think we want to distance ourselves from the Constitution and from kind of the Christianity that helped form it?
Chesterton says somewhere that Satan fell by the force of gravity. We sin downhill. We sin intellectually because we're lazy. It's easy to fall down and it's hard to stand up. That's the short answer. Going back to your it's easy in the lazy way to believe lies that we're fed. So, for example, when someone says the founders were deists, that's technically true in that some of them were, like around 2%,
Right. The minority.
Right. So, and even the ones that you could say were influenced by deism, Jefferson and Franklin preeminently, they were very bad deists because they believed that God intervenes in human affairs, which Enlightenment deism denied. God just created the world and then walked off. And then when Thomas Paine, who was not technically a founder, he wrote an immensely popular tract called Common Sense that was a big influence in the Revolutionary period. But then later, when he wrote his book Age of Reason, the whole founding generation came down on him like white on rice. He was rejected and ostracized for his infidelity. So I think it's beyond dispute that the United States, in its founding, was an overwhelmingly Christian culture led by overwhelmingly Christian leaders. At the Constitutional Convention, there were 55 men there. And out of the 55, 50 of them were Orthodox Trinitarian Christians.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's just a historical fact, but it just boggles my mind that we can look back at well-documented facts and just kind of ignore those. It's really sad. Right. So we have a document like the Constitution, people saying, let's blow it up, it's dead. I say, functionally, I think there are many aspects of it that we don't adhere to anymore. Would you agree with that? I mean, there's just
part of it that we there are big chunks of the Constitution that are a dead letter. Let's say just 9th and 10th Amendments to the Constitution are a dead letter. Nobody pays any attention to them. However, there are parts of the Constitution that are very much alive, and this helps us to understand how constitutions work. Constitutions are simply pieces of paper, which means that if we fly into Afghanistan, conquer it, and give them all a piece of paper, that piece of paper will not accomplish anything, whatever, because constitutions derive their vibrance from the hearts and minds of the people.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and this is why the parts of our Constitution that are still alive are still alive. The Second Amendment would be an example. Right? Why is the Second Amendment of the Constitution still alive and vibrant? Well, because Americans all think it is.
Yeah.
Right?
Or have that attitude that they think it's important or something that we should uphold.
Correct. So out of every 100 Americans, there are about 120 guns, and everybody believes that they assume and believe that the Second Amendment is a living, vibrant protection that they have, and consequently, it is.
Yeah.
That's the same. The same is true for parts of the First Amendment. Many Americans still think that they have the freedom of speech. Unfortunately, we're now divided, where the Democratic Party doesn't believe that anymore, and it's being challenged. Right. And we're having battles over censorship. But the reason we're having a battle is because millions of Americans still believe they have the right to speak their mind. And so consequently, that part of the Constitution is still alive and kicking. But the part that says the express powers part of the Constitution, any power that's not given to the federal government expressly belongs to the states or to the people, that's just simply ignored. Nobody thinks that's true.
Yeah. So you bring up a very good point here, and I think we're on the same page, because I realized this in my 20s. I was, walked around very proudly. I'm a conservative. Well, I don't even know what that means anymore. 20 years later, we have Christless conservatism everywhere. Right. But then I realized in my late 20s, the Lord saved me, changed my heart, and kind of showed me exactly what you're saying is we can make all of the laws and rules and amendments we want, but that Constitution reflects the heart of the people, the morality of the people. And I think it was Adams that might have said, our Constitution is only for a moral and religious people. I might be messing that up, paraphrasing a little bit.
No, that's very good.
So that's kind of where you've been, and you kind of showed me this even probably 10 or 11 years ago in some talks that you had of this is why we preach the gospel and the Lord changes hearts, because we can make all the amendments and have all the little incremental stuff politically. And I'm not throwing that out. There's people who are working in that, and I'm in, the public sphere, the elected public sphere and all that. But until the hearts of the people change and they understand that Christ is king, then what are we doing? That's why the culture wars are, I think, so important, and why what you guys are doing out there in Moscow is so important, preaching Christ crucified, because the hearts
Right.
of the people have to change, right? We just have this kind of propped up constitution, but functionally it's dead because the hearts of the people are corrupt. And I feel that's why the attacks on the culture are so important, especially from the far left, even from the moderate evangelical world. Because if you can change the hearts and ideas and the belief of the people, well, like you said, the Constitution is just a piece of paper, correct?
Yeah, just a piece of paper. And to finish the Adams quote, it was John Adams. Our Constitution presupposes a moral and a religious people, and then he says it is wholly unfit for any other. So if we drift into if we become a nation of fornicating potheads, the Constitution is not capable of governing a people like that. It's just going to come apart in tatters.
By what means do you think he meant that? It's unfit. Why would it come apart because the people are essentially, they don't believe its founding principles of what it states?
Yes, and they will obtain power in order to abuse fellow citizens, and they will circumvent the Constitution. They will say it really, you'll start getting court decisions that say the right to keep and bear arms means that you don't have the right to keep and bear arms. You will start to you'll have Supreme Court justices or nominees saying that they don't know what a woman is because they're not a biologist, right? Well, if you don't know what a woman is or what a man is, you don't know what a human is. And if you don't know what a human is, you don't know what human rights are. Right?
Yeah.
How can you?
Absolutely.
Everything is out the window.
Yeah. So has there ever been a time in the country, in your opinion, where the Constitution was functioning, or the people were reflecting the principles of the Constitution as closely as the founders had envisioned? In so much, and I've read some things on Jefferson fighting for all men created equal, some wording, because they understood with slavery going on and the economic impact that was actually a compromise. There were some that were abolitionists and said, hey, we need to, and then there was a contingency that said, look, we'll upheaval the economic structure of the country if we abolish that. And there was some give and take there to going, they had a vision of, well, maybe in the future under these principles that would be eradicated. Now, once again, not an expert, so I could be kind of skewing some stuff there, but I've read some stuff on that. And I would say, if you look back, maybe there's never there's never going to be a perfect country, perfectly adhering to all the principles. But is there a time where we were pretty darn close to really reflecting what the founding fathers had intentioned in the Constitution? Was there a time in America like that, or are we just always missing the mark and trying to get close?
No, I think that if we were an 8-cylinder engine, there have been a few times when we were running on 6.
Right.
Okay.
Always misfiring a few. Yeah.
There's always a difficulty somewhere. There's always a fly in the ointment. But I would say that in the period after Reconstruction, up to World War I, was decent. It was a decent time constitutionally. I think Woodrow Wilson was a disaster, and I think the war between the states was a convulsive disaster, and Woodrow Wilson was a disaster. But I think that it was also relatively healthy in the Calvin Coolidge era. Okay. And then things started to go seriously south after the Second World War with the Earl Warren Court and the adoption of more radical secularism and so on. So from the time of its adoption in 1789 down through, let's say, 1830, decent. then the convulsion of the Civil War, real troubles. Then after Reconstruction down to the First World War, another decent period. And then the Calvin Coolidge era up through the Second World War. And then our generation has seen it erode badly.
Okay, so you set out that's very accurate. So you set out a very good kind of up and down. Now, for those believers out there that are maybe in politics or pay attention to this, they go, okay, but in the last 20 or 30 years, it feels like it's exponentially, we're firing on maybe one or two cylinders, to take your example, right?
Yeah,
so that's where I see it. Oh, go ahead.
We're by the side of the road, hood up, and fire.
we're trying to push the car. Okay. So I can see the sentiment of, hey, go extreme and start all over. So if we don't want to do that, how do we rescue how do we rescue ourselves from getting a people, even a non-believer, because I feel like even non-believers had some type of transcendent morality written on the code of their hearts. Even 50, 60, 70 years ago, it felt like they could tell we closed on Sunday. Okay, I'm not a believer, but I understand it. It's a day of rest, whatever, those Christians, right? Right. Or even abortion was something where it was like, no, that's taking a life. They understood the basic concept of murder. But now I feel like we've got people that are in bizarro world and they just go, oh yeah, murder up to the, right here in Michigan. I mean, Prop 2 passed. It was a constitutional amendment. 57% of people said, hey, if you want to have an abortion 1 second before the baby's born, you can do that. Hey, a teacher wants to take a 10-year-old to get a sex change and mutilate the genitals and not tell the parents. That's a constitutional right in Michigan now. That was voted for by 57% of Michigan. So we get what we deserve. But my point is, how do we save it then? I know we preach the gospel, but outside of that, are there pragmatic things? Are there practical things that we can do instead of just blowing it all up?
Yeah. So I'll cite here a law that my son has formulated. I don't have a name for it yet, but he said in any meeting that goes for longer than 20 minutes, someone will propose something which, if implemented, will ruin everything.
I worked in the corporate world for 10 years. That is so true.
Yeah. So let's say everybody said, oh, this is a disaster. We need a convention of the states. We need a constitutional convention. I have no assurance, since we are not a moral and a religious people, I have no assurance that what would come out of such a convention wouldn't be 10 times worse than what we have now. So consequently, I believe, and because the Constitution, which is a fine document, still has the instinctive loyalty of many Americans who still believe it's operative or ought to be. I would say, if I'm a salesman and I want to persuade Americans to do something good, why wouldn't I try to persuade them to do something good that they're over halfway convinced of already? If I just get a room full of ideologues and I cook up this grand spanking new thing that nobody's ever heard of, I've got a much harder task to sell anybody on that. And other people are going to be pitching their crazy ideas at the same time. And the chances are excellent to outstanding that we're going to come up with some dog's breakfast.
Yeah. Could you give me an actual example of that thing that maybe that average citizens out there, and you're saying they're already 50% believer, they're already there on it. Why not have them continue in that? What would be an example of that in your mind?
All right. Some trivial examples is they would say, yeah, we should have 2 senators from every state, even though one of them's Texas and one of them's Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Okay. We should have 2 senators from every state. At the same time, it makes sense. There's your Senate. It makes sense that the bigger states should have some weightier heft somewhere in this. So that's why we have the House of Representatives configured the way it's configured. I think a man ought to be able to criticize the government, speak his mind without being shut down by cancel culture.
Sure.
And that's where the enemies of the enemies of the Constitution have really have overreached in their
Yeah.
zeal to shut everybody up. Another one is, and this is just how Americans think. You could have people complain about the Electoral College, but it was a work of
Genius.
a work of
Art.
genius.
Yeah.
It was a work of art because nobody, if you talk to the average guy, you wouldn't say, why don't we add up the total runs scored during the World Series and decide who won by total runs?
Yeah.
It's that's dumb, right? You count the games won, you don't count the total runs.
Yeah.
And that's the Electoral College in a nutshell, right? And so I said earlier that the Constitution is a work of theological genius, and this is what I meant by it. If you gave the Constitution to an educated foreigner who had never heard of any of this, and he studied the Constitution, worked through it, and saw what it was trying to do, he would come back and I'd ask him, what do you think the central premise of the Constitution is? He would say, it seems to me the central premise of your Constitution is never trust an American.
Yeah.
Right. So the Constitution budgets for human depravity.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is what Madison says in Federalist 53, maybe 50, it's one of the 50s. Madison says that you have to contrive a form of government that enables the government to govern the people while at the same time obligating it to govern itself. Okay, that's the delicate balance. And so they came up with separation of powers, checks and balances, all of this, that as opposed to the Rousseauian view of democracy, where everybody's view is so valuable that you've got to check with everybody before you do anything. And then you have this social contract that enables you to not check with anybody.
Right.
There's that Rousseauian view of democracy that has this lofty, conceited, flattering view of human nature. Then you have what C.S. Lewis called a more realistic view of democracy, where you believe that everybody is so fallible, so messed up, and so sinful that you want to spread the power as thinly as possible over everyone to keep the bad guys from seizing power. Now, that was the ethos of the American founding, that they wanted limited government. So every Christian who believes in God's omnipotence must adhere to some polity that affirms limited government. Limited government means that Christ is Lord and man is not. When you reject the sovereignty of God, what the proud and conceited Caesar sees is a job opening. Right?
Hey, I can do that. I can be God. Right? Yeah,
I can do that. And first thing you know, you've got cameras at every intersection. You've got surveillance everywhere. You've got people tracking every keystroke on your computer. Why? Because they're aspiring to deity. They want to be omniscient. They want to be omnipotent. They want to be
omnipresent. Yeah. They want the character of God.
Yeah. They want to ascend the sides of the north.
Oh man, yeah, that's so good. Yeah, it's pretty crazy too. When I was very young, as we finish up here too, I realized probably when I was 8 or 9 that pure democracy was pretty easily manipulated. We'd get the group of kids together. You had that gang, that 10 or 12 kids that I grew up in the 80s. So it was like mom let you out at 8 o'clock in the morning. You didn't come back till 8 o'clock at night. You drank out of, hose water and just ran around in the neighborhood. Yeah. We get all the kids together. And there was one kid that was a little more well off, and we'd always vote on what to play with or what game to play. And he came out and he's giving Rice Krispie treats out to everyone. Oh, that's nice. And we're all sitting there eating on the stoop. And he goes, "So what do you guys want to play?" And I went, and we always seemed to vote for what he wanted to do, the guy with the Rice Krispie treats. And I realized, oh, wow. As a young kid, I was like 8 or 9. I went, oh, just voting for something can be manipulated pretty
Yeah.
easily if you can get other people on your side. Now I didn't know what I was working through in my head as a 9 or 10-year-old. But we've got a lot of adults out there, especially on the kind of liberal Democratic side of the aisle, that think pure democracy is something we should strive for, when the republic that we have, the constitutional republic, boy, and when is such a safeguard against that. And it's all shifting, and it makes me very worried, because when I talk to other adults that should be at least have a level of common sense of understanding that pure democracy is right. Whatever Franklin said, two wolves and a sheep voting what's for dinner, like how can we not see that? And then you have something in the in the electoral vote too that was protected against that. Not to go back to that, but it's such a work of genius of understanding that you would have back then million person states clearly outvoting the 200,000 person states for certain rights and things they want to do. But absolutely, yeah.
I'm mindful of two definitions of democracy that H.L. Mencken came up with. One of them was the ascertaining of truth by the means of counting noses and promulgating it afterwards with a club. That's one.
Wow.
And the other definition of democracy was the art and science of running the zoo from the monkey house.
Yeah, no, that's true. All right, let's finish up here. So final word, final kind of thought, because like I said, I struggle personally as someone who is locally elected, involved in politics, but also just did a podcast last night with the Provoked folks out there at Apologia Studio on how we evangelize, whether that be with family, street preaching, going throughout our day, and very convicted about that, and making sure I'm preaching the gospel and knowing that only God can change hearts. And when hearts are changed, that's when countries can be changed. So there's this kind of weird two worlds I'm in. I'm all about policy, and I love to see guys like Dusty Devers, for instance, in office and standing firm on godly principles and making legislative change. But I also know that preaching the gospel and only God can change hearts. So I'm caught in between these two, where I get conflicted sometimes. I go, am I going in one direction too much? And I know it sounds weird to say one direction and preaching the gospel too much, but sometimes I look at it, let's say an open air preacher who's screaming at the top of his lungs on the corner of a street, and everyone's walking by him and ignoring him. And I go, well, I don't know, maybe you could be a little more effective if you were in the state house, right? Yeah. Like there's balance there. So where do we make that balance when we view the Constitution, when we view how we make godly change within a civil authority?
So I would say two things. One is we should view this first as a body life thing. We are each of us finite, and we can't do everything. So some guy's a barber, and he serves Christ by cutting hair all day, and that's what he should continue to do. The preacher of the gospel should preach. The politician should make godly laws, and we should all labor. And then the preacher who knows what the word says should support and teach and encourage the statesman and so on. So it really is a body life thing. It's not like we all have to drop whatever we're doing and go do the one thing. That I don't think that's true. We ought to zoom out and ask ourselves, what should the body of Christ generally be involved in? And the answer to that is everything. All of Christ for all of life. All right. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we should remind ourselves of our history. So it's not a matter of, do I do this one thing or this other thing? It's the recognition that this Y is not going to be successful until X happens. Okay. Now I should be laboring faithfully at Y, but I know that if I should be tilling the ground and tending the crop, and at the same time praying for rain, because I know that if I don't get the rain, this is not going to happen. But I still plow and weed and do the things I ought to do. And then there's two instances in Anglo-American history that I would point people to. The Evangelical Awakening in England and the Great Awakening in America, both were part of the same movement and happened roughly at the same time. The Wesleys and George Whitefield in England. And it has been wisely said that that awakening in England was one of the reasons why England didn't have their version of the French Revolution. Okay. The French Revolution was this total leveling, disastrous thing, and it sort of released the demons into the modern age.
Yeah.
And England was preserved from that because of preachers. All right, because of the evangelical awakening, which transformed England. 18th century England was a cesspool. It was the aristocracy was disease riddled with vice, and the common people were oppressed and abused, and the evangelical awakening addressed a lot of that. So that's one example. The other example would be the Great Awakening in America. I'm convinced that without the labors of George Whitefield over here, the American War for Independence, which happened just a few decades before our War for Independence, without the labor, I became convinced a number of years ago that a second GW was a second father of our country, George Whitefield and George Washington.
Yeah.
One was the military political father of our country. I believe that George Whitefield was the ecclesiastical father of our country, because had that Great Awakening not happened, the War for Independence either would not have happened or would not have gone the way it did. And so consequently, it's not like we're praying for something when we're farming this in this dust bowl that we're currently farming in. It's not as though praying for rain has never been answered. God has answered. God has answered that prayer in history before, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be asking him to hear us again.
Yeah. Love it. It's so great to hear you talk about that too. One of my pastors, David Bailey, for our 9 a.m. Sunday school in summer, we're all as a church in Sunday school together, and we're walking through that. And he couldn't. He would just kept emphasizing the effect that Whitefield had, because that's where we're at in church history right now, and it really opened my eyes to it. I knew the name. I knew kind of what he did. Oh, he's a good preacher, but really the effect he had during that 30 years of just selfless preaching and what he did. Very important. So kind of fun to hear you kind of say the same thing. All right. Last question has nothing to do with the subject, but I just got to ask, as we finish here, how has the results of being on Tucker been? Lot of good feedback, bad feedback. I know that happened a month or two ago. It was a surprise to a lot of us. We said, oh my gosh, I can't believe there's 4 million people tuning in to watch Tucker Carlson and Doug Wilson. Any death threats from the crazies, or how was it overall? Was it a good result?
The reactions have been overwhelmingly positive.
Okay.
And that's one thing. And the second thing is it has opened a lot of other doors.
Good.
So what is basically, we've been under embargo here in Moscow for many years. And there's a respectable type of evangelical leader that cannot afford to name me. I'm the one who must not be named. And a number of other doors and opportunities have opened up as a result of that.
Yeah, it's so good. I love when I meet people and they say, oh, wow, I mean, just look at that, just shot right to some type of celebrity. And I said, yeah, it only took them 40 or 50 years of pastoring a church to get an interview. It was so quick. Okay. All right. Enough of that. All right. Pastor Doug, thank you so much for being here, taking some time with us, explaining some things, giving your opinion. I really appreciate you.
Yeah. Good to be with you. Thanks.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening to another episode of Dead Men Walking Podcast. As always, you can find out more about us, dmwpodcast.com. We're going to be down at Fight Laugh Feast. We might even see Pastor Doug there in the next few months. You have links there, too, to pick up tickets. We're going to be kind of heading up Media Row and have a lot of good podcasts there. So make sure you contact us. You can text us now, right in the description below. Shoot me a message right to the phone. I hid my number. So it is hidden, guys. You're not going to get my actual number, but it'll come to my phone and we'll answer it. As always, remember, the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. God bless. Be sure to check us out at dmwpodcast.com, where you can purchase the best and snarkiest merch on the internet, support the show, and leave us a review or message. Dead Men Walking can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Dead Men Walking Podcast, and on Twitter X at Real DMW Podcast. The Dead Men Walking Podcast is part of the Fight Laugh Feast Network. For exclusive show content, be sure to download the PubTV app and become a member. If you're a business that needs to reach hundreds of thousands of potential customers in your demographic, podcast advertising might be for you. Send all inquiries to deadmenwalkingpodcast@gmail.com.
None your biscuits.